Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Transformation Cycle, Ensuring Comprehensive Planning and Execution from the Case for Change through Change Management. My name is Anna Kulisheva and I'll be your moderator. In this webinar, you will hear all about a proven roadmap to seamless transformation, aligning people, processes, and technology for lasting impact, ensuring sustainable success in an evolving business landscape. This event is live, so if you have any questions throughout the presentations for our speaker, please put them in the Q&A or chat box. We'd love to hear from you. And now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Chaz Moore, Vice President of Transformation at JD Partners. Welcome, Chaz.
Thank you very much, Anna. Appreciate having the time today. So, my name is Chaz Moore. I am the Executive Partner, Vice President for Transformation for JD Partners. I've been with JD for 13 years, prior to that in healthcare, and I'm responsible for overall quality assurance and technical expertise for all of our JD projects. And today we're doing this webinar. I'm going to do about 30 minutes of content, and then we'll have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please do type them in the Q&A. I will endeavor to watch that and respond to them either during the meeting or during the Q&A session. Any questions we don't get to, I'll be happy to, we'll do a follow-up and respond to that. So before we get started, it would be great to understand who's in the room with us virtually today. So if you could respond to the first poll, and Anna will bring that up. I'll just give you a few moments to indicate who's in the room. Okay, great. So just taking a look at this, we have about 9% C-suite, 25% senior management, operational, advisory. Excellent. That's a nice mix. So really appreciate that. It's really helpful to understand who's here and help us tailor the responses. Okay, today's webinar has 7 sections. First, we'll start on a bit of background about JD Partners, our services, and our client. And then we're going to take a look at the transformation cycle. We're going to talk about the 3 implementation pillars: people, process, and technology. And we'll also do a poll after reviewing the transformation cycle and find out where you are, your organization is currently in that transformation cycle. So as we go through it, see what parts of it are most relevant to your organization, and then we'll just find out where everybody is. Once we take a look at the transformation cycle, we're going to have a section on why transformation failed. So that's always interesting to share some war stories and understand what you want to watch for. We'll also take a look at the role of technology enabler and then change management. The last section will be some case studies. We've laid out 4 case studies, and in order to maximize the time together, we'll have our third and final poll, and I'll ask you which case studies this group is most interested in. We'll cover 2 of them, and then we'll go straight to Q&A. So JD Partners. We are a global organization, part of the QX Global Group, 3,000 employees worldwide, 6 delivery centers, including large centers in India and Latin America. So who is JD Partners? We're former CFOs, CHROs, and practitioners who first teamed up in 2006 and offer strategic advisory and practical support to our clients. So we offer specialist effort and capacity to enable your back office transformation from assessment straight through to implementation. We're not just strategic advisors. We actually roll up our sleeves and help you to achieve your transformation through the detailed project management, the roundtables and workshops, and the analysis to actually achieve that target operating model. We have 3 service lines. our DNA. For the past 20 years, we've been doing operation transformation, heavily into shared services and GBS and the end-to-end services. We also have been doing partner management, which is interesting. That's where we partner with clients who have their preferred outsourcer, and we do a 3-in-a-box. And we help bridge both the client to make sure their needs are met, but also the outsourcer to translate those industry and business requirements into language that's relevant and act as that independent advisor to make sure it's successful for both parties. Over the past 10 years, we've been building our digital enablement practice. So this includes acting as a system integrator for Oracle and ServiceNow and other software and applications, as well as robotic process automation, RPA, intelligent automation, artificial intelligence, and now getting into AI, agentic AI. And then our last one, our newest service line is Flex BPO. This one is interesting. We've had clients who have been dissatisfied with India-based outsourcing and struggling with night shift to service and support US-based clients. A lot of time, India-based outsourcing works very well if you have stable processes that are quite mature and you can achieve great labor arbitrage and have super well-performing processes. But where there's process friction, where you need to have interaction, you have that 12-hour time delay. And then it's hard to retain that top tier staff in those night shift locations. As soon as the day shift opens up, they're likely to move into that, even if they stay with the same outsourcer. And so with that, clients have come to us and said, we'd like to embed transformation. We'd like to have that Chasey culture in our organization. We want a captive, but we don't have experience in Latin America. Could you help us? And so we removed the red tape. We set up the service center. So for all intents and purposes, it's like a captive for the client, but we are embedding productivity guarantees, leading practices, and we're doing all that work under the direction of the client. So that's Flex BPO. It's really flexible for the client. It's quite an exciting option for clients who are looking to have accessible nearshoring as one of their options. So here's a list of our global clients, an illustration of several of them. We have significant experience across industries in private and public sectors and in higher education and in government. Okay, so now here is the webinar content, the transformation cycle. So where did the cycle start? Well, you could wake up one day and find yourself at any point in the cycle. Perhaps you are assigned to a new project and you're midway through implementation. But for simplicity, let's assume you're starting with the case for change and the business case. So the business case is ideally a comprehensive assessment of your current state. We often talk about it going wide, but not very deep, just so you get a good sense of all of the opportunities out there. And it should provide all the information needed by leadership and then to help support their decision-making, as well as serve as an accountability framework for the whole transformation. And then the case for change is a simpler document. Done rather than a business case is depending on the number of functions involved, the scope, how many regions. That is probably between 8 to 12 weeks to do a business case. For a case for change, that's something that can be done in about 4 to 6 weeks, again, depending on scope. And with that, what you can do with that, that case for change can help you, perhaps the project lead, to get the budget approval to start the process. So it's a quicker document. When an organization reaches out to us, if they're having difficulties, one of the first questions we're going to ask is, do you have a business case? And so many endless ERP projects or projects that don't have a strong vision or are struggling don't have a business case. And back at the beginning of a transformation, when people are excited, there's a no-brainer case for this. The need for a business case might not seem very important, but it is insurance, because when leadership changes, when the environment changes, and people are asking, why are we doing this? If you don't have that business case that documents all the pros and cons, the reasons, the rationale, and provides strong reason to move forward, then you're going to be struggling. And so that can really provide that accountability framework and what you're doing. One example is we were working with the government of New Brunswick, which is one of Canada's Atlantic provinces on the East Coast. And we were doing setting up shared services for them, which was at the time quite innovative for government to be doing shared services. It's been for the past 30 years for private sector to be doing shared services. It was less prevalent, especially in Canada, in the government. And the provincial government at the time set it up, and then there was an election midway through our implementation. And the opposition party seized upon this as an election issue and campaigned on closing down shared services. It was the worst thing to happen to the province. It's going to take jobs away from communities. And you can imagine what the election campaign looked like. Well, the opposition party won. Not just because of shared services, different issues. The government had been in for a while, and there's always a churn. A turnover is healthy for democracies. And we met with the opposition parties as part of the government, and we met with them, and we showed them the business case, and we showed them the reason for doing it. And when you looked at it, it made a lot of sense. And so with that, the opposition party ended up expanding the scope of shared services and then taking credit for all the good ideas that were included in it. And we finished the implementation, and it's very successful. And that's actually become government of New Brunswick become a very strong example of what shared services can do in public sector and government. So after the business case, we have the implementation phase. And so here are 3 pillars of the transformation cycle: people, process, technology. And you can see here for each of those pillars, we've outlined some key activities. This is not all of the activities, but these are certainly important milestones for doing the work. And so if you take a look at people, for example, with the operating model, once you've done the business case, you understand what the opportunities are. You need to understand what is your target. An operating model drives everything else. It drives what processes you're going to be having, what the roles and scopes are, and what technology is going to be happening. Employee transition is critical. That is where you're taking your existing people that you have and you're actually intentionally mapping them to your future state organization. And so you understand whether these people are being transferred, changes in roles, what recruitment you need, what exit strategies you need, and you're being very intentional about everybody in the organization based on the information that you captured in prior phases. And then from that, you're moving into recruitment, onboarding, and executing on live. But you also need to take a look at process. So what are the process maps we're doing? Have that cascade down to the work instruction, and then do the formal work shadowing and process training to enable that. And then technology is its own work stream. You need to do a formal discovery, lift up the hood, understand what specifically needs to happen. Then you do the design requirements. Very important at business engagement at this point to make sure they're signing off. One of the mistakes made is that the business can throw it over to the technology team and say, you guys are the experts, you tell us what we need. And then what happens is technology will do their best effort, and then users are wondering, this isn't relevant to us. And so you really need strong people on that team engaged to make sure that it is a proper collaboration. Then you build test, and then you do cutover, and that culminates in go live. So the next phase is once go live, you have a period of stabilization. You're making sure you're going back to that business case. Did we actually implement what we said we would implement, and how are we doing it? There's also an important handover from the project team to the operational team so that we have the structures to support. So these are things like global process ownership, continuous improvement teams, communication resources to sustain. Because once you build it, if you don't nurture it, it will start to wean. If you set up shared services and you just leave it in the corner, over time, there's a risk that it starts to drift into traditional corporate standardization. There's also a risk that it's seen as overhead and it doesn't have the same innovation and that sort of business mindset to get that value. But then over time, environment changes and you move into a continuous improvement program and you're moving it over and the team is quite successful. And then you start having changes perhaps in leadership, in people, might be a merger, a change in the organization. The environment changes, you have a new case for change, and then the cycle repeats itself. Now, the center of everything that you do in transformation needs to be about the client. There's a risk that, especially if you have a command and control organization, that the center believes they understand what is needed and they do the transformation to the client instead of with the client. I was facilitating a metrics workshop once, and this was a couple of days, and it was really interesting. It was for a university in California, and they had various groups. We had finance, HR, but we also had pastoral services and facilities, and a lot of or parts of the organization that you wouldn't typically think about putting on a performance dashboard. Really interesting talking about pastoral people saying, what are my metrics as a minister helping advise students? So that was an interesting conversation. And one of the key questions that came from finance, actually from AP, was how do I make my client care about my performance report? And that was a great question. And it's a key question. And the response was, have you asked them what is important to the client? And the answer was no, because it's accounts payable. We know what the standard metrics should be, and there's a standard industry dashboard that we should be putting out there. So of course that would be relevant for the client. And so that was an interesting conversation. We said actually the first step in performance metrics is ask the client what's important to them. And then you're going to have some space to tell them what's important to you. It becomes a collaboration, and then a client can be much more engaged in your reporting. So that's the client. Now, the other part I should comment on, what do we mean by when we say client? And the client is the person who provides the inputs or receives the outputs of your process. So however you define that, and they're the people who have skin in the game. They have the opportunity to influence. So these are the administrative managers, the power users in your organization. They're the individuals who will help you define what self-service would look like. They're the people, this is what the output looks like. Is this going to be appropriate? And you have that conversation. And to help contrast that when we talk about client, we mean the internal client of the organization. There's other couple of groups. One group is the consumers. So the consumers are the general employee population or the broad vendor population, depending on who you're serving. They're consumers because they're a large group. You're not going to have a one-to-one relationship with them. They're generally not aware of their impact on a process. And so they just basically, they provide their input, their volume, and they just accept the output, but they don't have any sort of, you can't really collaborate with them. They're just too large of a group. The clients are the representatives. So they're keeping the consumers in mind. And often the consumers are the reason the HR organization exists. It's the reason we do things. So it doesn't diminish them, but it's practicality. So when we talk about the internal client, it's those people we're working with. The last group would be stakeholders. Those are people who don't directly interact with processes, things like senior leadership, and they're basically putting the stoplight, the vetoes on the process and what changes we're making. Okay, so that's the client. They're the center of everything we do. We developed a service management framework, which are 9 elements to help deal with that. We find when we talk about the transformation cycle that the client can be a blind spot. So a lot of organizations get excited about new technology. They probably think about training their people and making sure we have the right security groups and other things needed for the people side, and optimizing processes to align to the next new technology, but they often forget about the client. And so what we developed is a service management framework. It's 9 elements. It's things like performance metrics, thinking about a tiered support structure about how you're going to receive volume in, client feedback, service partnership agreement, and other elements like communication governance. And so that was a formal framework that we can evaluate and make practical recommendations for people to strengthen that and properly engage with your client and make your transformation sustainable. So the transformation cycle doesn't work alone. It's really key to have effective project management and engage governance, and also change management throughout the cycle. We're going to talk a little bit more about change management at a latter part of the presentation. And then the final part of the animation is the enablers. RPA, robotic process automation, intelligent automation, artificial intelligence, and then underneath all of it, data cleanup. So we have a couple of questions here. Excellent. Okay, so we have regarding the transformation cycle. What if one of the pillars is underdeveloped and will go live, be held up, and cascading to transformation? Great question. And so, so if one of these pillars is a trophy, it's not weak, will that delay your go live? Hopefully. And by that is, as you're doing your readiness assessment, you should be evaluating all of these pillars. And I have seen a weak pillar hiding behind a weaker pillar. And so, for example, say the technology group is struggling, and then there's some issues in process, and they haven't cleared out their roles and such, but they're not the ones that have to hit the red light and say, roll the red flag, because technology is getting all the heat. So they stay quiet. And then so there's a lot of focus from governance to make sure technology is there and it's cleaned up. You're getting ready for go live. And then the process, people say, oh, actually, we have a problem too. And that's very dangerous. I very much have heard that's when you have those hallway conversations that people are saying, yeah, I'm not going to put my hand up. And you really need to step back and get your project managers and properly engage with that. So yes, it can delay, and that's a good thing if you're at that point. Now, obviously, you want to, right back at the business case phase, understand what resources and what is needed for each of these three pillars, and then manage them with effective project management and governance throughout, so you're not having one of those pillars collapse. So that's one piece that we need to talk about. Then the next one, another question here is, say that I answered live. Okay, another question. How do you measure impact, outcomes, and success? That's good. You probably heard if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So in the business case, these types of work, and one person's business case is another person's case for change. You might say it's quite loose. At Chazy, we do a very robust business case. It's going to include an activity-based analysis where we are asking people what they are doing in blocks of effort, so we have a good understanding of what's happening out there. We're doing benchmarking. We're talking to stakeholders. We're doing roundtables. We're assessing the service management framework. We're developing an opportunity matrix, comparing it to leading practices, making recommendation, connecting with governance, making sure we get their feedback and making very relevant. It's quite a robust document, which includes targets. What are your financial targets you're going to achieve? What are the service improvements? What are the compliance issues you're going to do? Then in the design phase, which will be the first part of the implementation, you need to flesh that out. So we're going to improve services. We're going to achieve productivity. In design phase, you're very specific on what productivity, which sub-processes, what specifically are we going to be doing. We're going to be, what are the service targets? What are going to be the impact? What are the changes? Once you've done the design work, you go back to the business case, you refresh it, because you obviously are going to be making assumptions during the business case, and you refine those assumptions, and you come back, and there's a toll gate at the end of design to say, we've now clarified our assumption. This is what we're going to achieve. And do you still agree? And it was interesting. I did a business case once, and it was all robust, and we were very excited about it. And then at the 11th hour, one of the leaders suggested, we like everything we're doing. We like the shared service, everything proposal, but we want it to be a virtual model. And that was earlier in my career, and that was tough, but we were really excited about getting budget approval. And it's like, okay, we'll make that work. And it was really, really tough. And eventually, midway through implementation, we actually had to say, this isn't going to work. The change management is huge. This was an organization that had very small one-person offices, about 18 single points of failure. And doing a virtual office, trying to maintain that, it was public sector, so you're trying to do community employment was a soft part of their mandate. So creating centralized services, there was resistance to that. But that change management and those single points of failure ultimately were too difficult. And we had to then bite the bullet. And so that would be one thing early on that you need to have that experience to say, actually, that's not going to work, or we need to re-change the business case significantly to soften some of the target, bring in more change management. We can't go in with same resources and assumptions if you're going to make a fundamental change like that. But then once you have those metrics, you are accountable to those. You're setting up your structures for that all the way through, and you're reporting back to governance through that. And then with go live and stabilization, one of the key parts of stabilization is issuing your performance reports and coming back and say, are we achieving it? And if not, do we need to retrain? What do we need to do to achieve that? Okay, another question, which I love these questions. I'm going to answer them where it's in time. How many PM resources are allocated to transformation, and are they all external? Excellent. So with project management, you can absolutely do it internal to the organization. It really depends on can you create dedicated capacity? That's one of the key questions. If you're doing this off the side of your desk, that is tough. When it was my first project with JD, I was a client, and I had a good friend with the internal auditor, and she came down and she said, Chad, what is this external consulting group? That wasn't usual for us to have external consultants. She said, why can't you do everything that's here that they are doing? And I went, yeah, I could do job descriptions. I could do this. Yeah, everything under there I understand, and I could do it, and it would take me 3 years. The external consultant is going to come in and we're going to get this done in 12 weeks. And she said, you're absolutely right. I'll leave. And that was good. And it was a good relationship, and I really appreciated it. She was a fixture in our organization and asking those tough questions. But it was, you can do it, but you do it off the side of your desk, it's going to be longer. So you can do it internally, but one of the questions, can you create dedicated capacity? It is very important to have internal project managers, internal subject matter experts as part of the transformation and part of the team as you're engaging. Because you don't want just an external solution where they're the expert and you don't have any internal knowledge. Okay, and then in terms of the number of project managers, it's going to depend on the structure. You're obviously going to have one lead senior project manager, and then depending on how many functions, how many regions, you may have some assistants. Generally, we would recommend having an external project manager and an internal, and they're working in collaboration, that partnership approach throughout. Okay, so that was, really appreciate your time. That's the transformation cycle. So we're gonna have our second poll. Where are you, your organization, in the transformation cycle? And if you could select one of those.
We'll give it another 10 seconds. And the results are on screen.
Great. So here, okay, so quite even. So we have about a quarter in business case, a quarter in implementation, several in continuous improvement, and then others not applicable. Okay, great. Thank you. That's great to hear. Okay, so why do transformations fail? There's foundational issues. So opaque vision, one of the key failures is around leadership. And a change in leadership can be a death knell for a project if the new leader wants to put their own mark on organization, or it could be a burst of energy facilitating decision-making and strong direction. We talked about the business case. Project management is critical. One of the key tips is you need to make sure you get the best people. So when you're establishing your project team and you're asking the business, we need some power users, so we need some key subject matter experts to join us. You need to make sure these are the best people, not the people that the business is willing to let go and join for a project. And then engaging that client is going to be absolutely critical. The next pillar is the people issues. If you have the wrong operating model, if your incentives aren't aligned, and that's all about change management. If you retain the wrong people. So that one on the pillar called misfiring. You need to do a proper employee transition plan and map how the people are going to shift and how the organization is going to shift. I've seen some organizations use financial pressure. So if you have a central office that's creating shared services and either business units or schools, they want to leave authority to the schools. So instead, or the businesses, so instead of telling the business who to promote, who to transfer, who to fire, they put a cost pressure. Say, this is what the internal cost is going to be. We're going to do a recharge. You need to transform and make your own decision. And initially, often a business likes that because it empowers them to make their own decisions. What often happens, depending on the strength of governance and accountability and targets, is that those changes don't actually happen effectively. You get shadow operation, and then it's seen at the central as a cost pressure. And so it causes friction. And then over time, the rationale for doing that is forgotten as people shift, and they just see this cost pressure and this overhead from the center. So you want to make sure you really put some focus on that employee transition arm. So the middle pillar is the process issues. So if you do lack end-to-end perspective, so if you're trying to do transformation and you only control a small part of the process, you need to think about upstream, you need to think about end-to-end as well as the downstream impact. And data quality reporting and process ownership is critical. If you don't have process ownership, you don't have anyone to say no. And what that means is you're going to often have fragmented systems. Strong voices are going to get the process changes. Well, this is a better way of doing it. It's more effective, and I'm pushing it through. And you start to get a lot of fragmentation. If you have someone who's the process owner who is empowered by leadership to make those decisions, they can assess. And if that's a good solution, let's make it across the board so it's part of our core. But we don't want to have these rogue parts of our organization. And then the last one is the technology issues. One of the things that we sometimes organizations chase best of breed systems. And if you can get 80% of what you need from your core ERP, from your core system, you shouldn't be chasing that best of breed. Because that last 20%, the reason you bought that application is going to be very hard to achieve it because you're going to be focused on integration issues, maintenance of two systems, training people in two systems, and all that energy and such will mean that you probably aren't going to achieve that 20%, the reason you bought that best of breed system. And then weak IT governance. This is one where you need a governance structure which includes both IT and the business. I've seen many organizations individually, the functions or the businesses submit what they want to IT, and then IT manages the process with leadership to decide what's going to go forward. You need business at that collaboration decision-making table. And so otherwise you're throwing over the fence and you're not going to get the result you need. Role of technology enablers. So a key point with technology enablers, they can facilitate a transformation, but they're not transformative alone. So if you automate a poor process, you got to be careful. It could simply fail faster. And so before you think about automation, you want to eliminate, standardize, optimize. It's much better to eliminate something that isn't value added than just automate it. You need to have good data, take a look at end-to-end. You want to be using core functionality before third-party tools, and they need to select the right tool. And so we have a selection of 3 tools here. We have RPA, artificial intelligence, and then agentic AI. So RPA is the automate the repetitive rules-based tasks. If you have someone who is, for example, maybe from a case management system is taking information and then turning to their second screen, and entering it into the HRMS. That is a swivel chair integration, which is just double entry. RPA is perfect for that sort of solution. If you can't do the integration in the core system, RPA works that human interface layer and does that seamlessly, more accurately, and that's great. Artificial intelligence is more and more in what we're getting experience with, and you're using natural language, and it's dealing with unstructured data, and it's simulating human intelligence. And then you get a agentic AI. And so an artificial intelligence would be, for example, we're working with one client. They have hundreds of pages, 18,000 words of process documentation. And what we're working with them to build a small language model. So taking their data, their knowledge management, their policy, load them into a small language model. ChatGPT is a large language model. A small language model means it's limited to your data. And then the help desk and the employees can use a natural language interface to ask it questions. And so now you're getting it, and then it feeds back to process documentation, much better than flipping through an index, or if you don't know how to spell a word, if you go to the dictionary, you kind of need to know how to spell it already to find it in the dictionary. If you have an issue and you're trying to find out how to solve it, maybe maybe if you have a payroll issue, is it a problem with your password? Well, that's IT. Is it a problem with how you're configured? Well, that can be HR. Or was there an issue in your timekeeping or payroll? You don't really know necessarily as a user. And so having the artificial intelligence can really help people with that interface. Then the last one, the agentic AI. This is where the AI has enhanced autonomy. And the greatest, the most basic example of that we probably all potentially have had experience with is fraud detection being used by credit card companies. So they're monitoring, the AI is monitoring this, seeing pattern. And when they actually notice something that looks unusual, they'll initiate a phone call, and they'll call you and get this robotic voice call you on your cell phone when you're on a vacation saying, hey, did you just do this hotel? You don't normally travel in this region. And then you call back. That's agentic AI. And it's just doing that. And there's not people behind that and the AI taking care of it. So Big Brother is here and coming. So change management. So a few words on change management. So the targeted outcome is based on solution quality and the acceptance of shareholders. So a technically excellent solution will struggle if your stakeholders aren't engaged. On the other hand, a technically weak solution can be very successful if the stakeholders are part of the decision-making and invested in the success of the project. So it's something to really keep in mind as you move forward. And then change management is more than just communication, and it's integrated across the transformation cycle. One of the questions that we sometimes get is, how do you make change management real? How do we move beyond theory? And what you do is you have a change manager as part of your PMO in the meeting, and you make change management is part of your project activities, and your project activities are part of change management. And so, for example, if you're doing a change survey, because you should do a change survey, you should know what you're going to do with those results. If you find poor or strong results, what is your reaction, and what are the change activities, and what are you specifically going to do? Are you going to do a town hall? Are you going to do retraining? What are you going to do? If you don't know what you would do with the range of results, don't do the survey. I've seen a lot of organizations go through the motions of change management. They do change management training, they do surveys, but nothing happens because they don't know what to do with it. So you need that practical approach to make it real. Okay, the last part here are the case studies. So we have 4 case studies here. Moving help desk to India, Alita will be cheaper. My metrics are green, my clients are red. Team successful despite processes, technology, and structure. And then we have an outsourcer, unable to retain talent on the night shift to support the US. So we'll hit to our next poll, and we'll find out which of these case studies are most interesting for the group. Okay, great. So let's talk about the third one and the second one. So let me get to this. Okay, team successful despite processing technology and structure. This probably resonated with people because it is common to many organizations. So you have very skilled people and they're successful despite processes not being optimized or standardized, despite your technology being mainly spreadsheets and your structures, you don't, it's a relationship-based organization. It's who you know will mean you're successful. But if you just try to, if you don't know who to talk to, you're going to have trouble. But the team's still successful. And so we had this client, and they were a multinational. The HR organization hadn't scaled effectively, and their benchmarking was in the bottom quartile for efficiency and cost. They had a lot of FTEs and they were quite expensive. And that was endemic of a generalist model where, because the processes weren't standardized, you actually needed a senior person to shepherd it, to navigate it, because you couldn't put a junior person on it because, one, you didn't have the process documentation and standard process, and you needed judgment to successfully shepherd it through. So having an expensive HR organization is not a criticism of the people, it's your whole ecosystem and how you're balancing and how you're managing. And the other part that was happening in the background for this client, they had this ERP program that was targeted to go live 2 years prior, but was still in progress. And so that was a concurrent project that we had to keep our eye on. So we came in, we did the business case, we supported implementation of the new operating model. We acted as a system integrator. One of the key parts was they had success factors. And when they put it in, they sent it to one of their analysts and said, here's the manual, implement it. And they implemented it in a few months. And it was always half done, it was always being patched, never fully functional. And so it needed to be re-implemented, and they were going live in finance with Oracle Fusion. And so it was a relatively easy decision to go with Oracle Fusion HR to match with that. And it was interesting because the ERP project would say, don't mess us up, you're going to slow us down. And so there was a lot of conversation about bridging. And so when ERP went live, how are you going to maintain success factors and still maintain the Oracle Fusion? With interesting, what ended up happening is we put in the proper governance, the proper project management. We implemented the Oracle Fusion HR on time, on budget, and the ERP is still not implemented today. And so a few months later, and with that, it was interesting because we still needed the bridging, but instead of bridging to the old system, we were bridging the new HR to the old ERP they were using. So that was interesting when you put the proper structures in. So what were some of the challenges in the current state? Their skilled people were limited by process technology and structure, siloed, relied on generalists, lacked strategic capacity. So we implemented a new operating model with India-based captive shared services, and then we looked at it end-to-end, redid the role, and put in that new model. Their technology was overly customized, out of step with current needs, and we put in Oracle Fusion HR. And then the processes weren't optimized. So this was the example I was talking about earlier, where we had 18,000 words, hundreds of diagrams and pictures, 173 pages, and we're working with them to build a generative AI model that can give access to it. I think the second one was the one prior. So let's take a look at this one. Metrics are green, but my clients are red. So this was a top tier public university, and they set up HR shared services. Beautiful location off campus, supporting both the healthcare campus and the academic campus. So they put it off campus so that it wasn't seen as overly favoring either. Put in the right people, put in the pieces, and then they had performance reporting, which was great. They had their performance metrics, they agreed what they were, and they shared them, which is important. Sometimes metrics people hold close to their chest and they're not willing to share. They were sharing with the schools and with the business unit. And what it showed is that the shared service center was achieving what they were expecting to achieve. But what it didn't acknowledge is that, for example, for recruitment, it was still taking 6 months to do recruitment. And so this is where the director would, when she tells the story, she would say, yeah, my metrics were green, but my clients were red because the end-to-end process was still not optimized because they only had focused on the shared services part of the process. And so we came in, did a health check 2 years post-implementation. It was another, we weren't involved in the original implementation, but they asked us to come in. And we actually did that measurement. We did the gap to leading practice. We reconciled back to the original business case, and we identified they're only measuring the part of the process they control. This is a tendency for providers. They feel nervous about measuring part they can't control. And what we did is we implemented that service management framework with input, operational, output metrics, and with proper agreement. So the input is measuring what the client impact on the process is. The operational is what the provider is responsible for, and then the output is the end-to-end. And so what we saw, for example, is there were a lot of discussions when you're doing employee requisition in terms of budget, approval, strategy, and internal upstream issues before it ever got to the shared services. And then there are certain process issues that the information wasn't complete, things like not capturing the address of the person you want to recruit and just expecting the shared services will be able to figure it out. That they have some sort of private investigator. No, they have to go back to the recruiter and the manager and say, what is the address? How do we do this? So optimizing that process has made a big difference. And then poor integration of system. This was one we reconfigured ServiceNow, so we got rid of that double entry. Okay, so I'm going to move here to formal Q&A. We've actually answered several questions as we've been moving along, so we're doing good timing, but are there any other questions that people would like to ask at this time?
Thanks so much, Chaz. I have a few questions for you, if I may. So if you would look at the pillars for the transformation cycle, is there anyone in particular that's most important out of all you mentioned?
Great, thank you. So if you take a look at the transformation cycle and the particular pillar, so process, people, technology, which is most important? They're all important. You can't ignore them, but the one that's going to have the most impact is going to depend on your current state and your targeted future operating model. What is that gap? So whatever has the largest gap, that's going to feel the most impactful. And so, for example, but when you do that, it can be the most impactful, but you need to enable it by looking at the other pillars. So say technology, you have good people, good processes, your technology is out of date. So the most important part is the technology pillar for that organization, that case. But if you just put new technology in without looking at people, training, roles, security roles, what processes, how they're going to change, you're going, even though those are incremental effort, if you miss them, you're going to be missing the boat. So it's going to depend on the situation and where your current state is to the future.
Right. There's a question from Robert on how to measure transformations. I think you kind of touched upon that.
I'll give it's asking for specifics. So I'll ask that specifically. So how do you specifically measure transformation? So again, it's going to depend on your goals and vision. So that's where you need to start. What is the purpose of your transformation? Are you achieving financial targets? Are you improving service? Are you dealing with some compliance issues? Those are probably aspects of all of those. So if we talk about finance, one of the parts that you do in the business case is, what is your productivity percentage? How many people are exiting? Are you establishing a captive? Are you using outsourcing? There'd be very specific outcome when you define a target operating model. It's not just be smarter, do better, very specific. So you're measuring those pieces. In addition, you're going to be commenting at a higher level on things like technology, on services. And so, for example, say your help desk. With a help desk with a tiered support structure, you would expect it to have tier 0, which is self-service. Tier 1 is a help desk where you have that front line, basically able to answer, say, 80% of the calls that they get. Then it gets escalated to senior people and then outside of business partners. You want that to be a funnel where most of things are handled by self-service and then successfully left. Say your organization has a reverse funnel. the self-service isn't effective, the help desk can't answer any questions they're getting, and everything gets escalated. You would put in specific targets about how many calls get escalated, what sort of how much of the volume is handled by self-service. And so you would put those into your business case, you would define them more precisely during the design phase, and you hold yourself accountable to that. So it can depend on your transformation, but it's very important to set those metrics.
Right. There's another question from Paul. Where do you think culture sits in a transformation process? How do you get change to stick with people?
So that's interesting. It's critical. It's critical to be involving, capturing and understanding this culture. And so one of the pieces that we would recommend is having your project team be a partnership between the external and internal. The external people are bringing the template, methodology, dedicated capacity. The internal team is bringing the understanding of culture and processes, and you're bringing that together. So it's the best of both worlds. You're doing some early activity to capture and understand that, and you need to define that as part of your solution. That needs to be invoked, or it's going to be tough. You can still change culture and transformation, but that's going to be very disruptive. When you take a look at your population of stakeholders, I've often heard 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 of people are going to be absolutely against this no matter what you do. 1/3 are skeptics, and then 1/3 are absolutely with you. They like change. You need to focus on the third that are skeptics because you can convince them. And the third that are absolutely against it, depending on your goal, where you're going, they either start shifting into the skeptics and moving on, or they decide to move to different departments that are impacted or out. So it needs to be reflected into your final solution. You need to respect that and you need to put in resources to make that real.
Right. Tess, and I would like to wrap up with just a final question from me. We can see that AI now is extremely popular with lots of organizations implementing AI. But what are the common mistakes organizations are making when trying to attempt to incorporate AI?
The first one be lack clear business objectives. Why are you doing it? What do you want to achieve? What are your metrics? What are you actually going to achieve? It's not field a dream, build it, and they will come, although that's a dated reference now. But you want to actually understand what are you trying to fix, what the impact, and so you can know whether or not it's successful. Poor data quality management, really take a look at a lack of executive buy-in or organizational alignment. And I'll just add, you need to be sure you're not ignoring ethical, legal, and bias issues. And there's been lots of examples that the AI itself isn't intelligent. It's learning from the data you give it. And so the data you give it has implicit biases, and it also will make insertions. So one of the key hallmarks of AI is making something new. It's not just reporting what's there. And so it's making connections and insight. And that insight and connection could be wrong. There's lawyers citing cases that don't exist because the AI decided they should exist. So you want to be really careful about that and putting the proper controls in.
Right, brilliant. And there's another question, Chas, I hope you don't mind. How critical is having updated process mapping in place before transformation, and at what level of detail? A question from our viewers.
This is great. You're warming my technical heart with the process mapping question. You need to understand why you're doing the process mapping and what you want to achieve. And I commonly say that you don't do things from a checklist. You understand why you're doing them. And so when you're doing process mapping, this is not process mapping from IT, which is following documents around and like a spaghetti. It's also not internal audit process mapping, which is all about controls and such. Business transformation is about people. And so you're doing process mapping to understand when something hands over to a person, so it's changing people, or it's changing systems for the person. And it's the level of process mapping, it's like what you would see in a job description because it's about people. So if you think about that, the bullets in a job description, I audit this, I approve this, I move this. That sort of level of detail is what you want, because ultimately you're using a process mapping to design your organizations, your roles and responsibilities, and your technology and all those pieces. Later, you will do work instructions that cascade from that you get to the detailed procedure. But one mistake people do is focus too much on that detail. You need to keep the process mapping at an appropriate higher level so you can get that decision making done and provide guardrails for your whole transformation.
Right. There's another question that popped up from Neil, and it's about the AI again. Have you seen the best roles that AI can be deployed, like more on middle management rather than shop floor people?
It's going to be that's a broad range. It's going to depend on the process you're talking about, and it's going to be depending on your underlying service needs. Certainly, AI has some strong use cases and other areas where it's not mature enough and not ready. So I'm going to give a more generic because that's such a broad range. It's starting to move into middle management. I think certainly the more frontline elements, it's where it's been first deployed. That's easier to understand. It's moving up, but it's getting better, but it's not there yet.
Right. And maybe we can take our final question before we wrap up, because another question just came up from Martinia. What about the sponsorship of the transformational journey? Who should be accountable for the overall transformation?
This is a member of the C-suite. So this is someone very senior reporting to the CEO, the president of your business unit, but someone who had budget authority and resource authority and accountability for it. They need to be engaged and connecting with, at least on that monthly basis, with issues, and you need that sponsorship. If it's too low in your organization, it's not going to be transformational by definition. So that's the quick answer. It's going to depend on your organization. You do want a single person to be responsible for that, but when you have that executive, that single person would be the chair of your executive steering, but then you need the member from the other business units, and importantly from the business too. I have seen a lot of executives which are only the back office representatives of finance, HR, IT, and corporate. And I said, where's the business? They're not part of this. And they're representing the business in their mindset, but not really. So you constituting a proper, having a single point from the C-suite as that chair, and then having proper representation at that executive level.
Right. Thank you so much, Chaz. That has been an absolutely brilliant presentation. Would you like to say anything to our viewers before we close this webinar?
I still see some more questions coming in. Really appreciate that. Please do reach out. We will go through any of the questions that we missed and do follow up. There's some free resources you can download. We'd love to talk to you. So please do reach out. We are very passionate about transformation. That's why we came together. We enjoy working together. We enjoy working with our clients and helping you achieve your transformation. So thank you very much for this time with you.
Thank you, Chaz, and thank you to our viewers for watching this webinar and staying with us for the whole hour. And I would like to remind you that there will be another webinar in July, so stay tuned with us. Thank you, Chaz. Bye-bye.
Thank you.